All right, and we seem to have audio. Next up, we need to install the cover over the timing case. And what we have with this is a paper gasket that fits over, and then our timing case. Now, a lot of folks would just install this dry. I have had mixed success with paper gaskets over time. So what I'm going to do is dress this with just a very thin coat of RTV on both sides of the paper gasket. Most folks will say either use the gasket or use RTV, not both. The idea here is to use the gasket, but just provide enough of a adhesive, a gasket dressing, to both hold it in place as well as help seal any imperfections that the gasket itself doesn't seal. This is just a very thin coat. Not a bead by any means. There are actually commercial gasket shellac, gasket dressings. Some of them are actually spray and adhesive based. If you're going to do this, remember you have to do it on both sides because you're sealing the gasket to the housing.
1 hour later.
Okay, so that's all the way around. Now what we're going to do is just smear it so that it's actually covering all of the surface on both sides. And just kind of spread it out, make it nice and even, remove any excess so that you have a nice thin, even coat on both sides of the gasket. Now, you have managed to make the gasket very sticky, and of course you've now got RTV all over your gloves. So we're going to put the gasket into place and then go clean up our fingers. This will adhere where you set it. Now, change your gloves. Next up, we need to install our timing cover. Now note, we have this installation aid here that is intended to help us make sure that the seal doesn't get caught as it goes over the crankshaft. So we're going to start by lining this up with that tool, with that aid, and pressing it on. Then, starting a couple of bolts to hold our cover in place. Now, going back to our other videos, that one clearly doesn't go there. I'm going to have to go back and check the tape again. I swear that was supposed to go in one of those two holes. Let me go back and review the tape on that as well as far as the orientation of this bracket. But that does look approximately right. All right, so I reviewed the tape. This is the correct one for that extra little knob. However, these two are the ones that are supposed to be for the studs for the tachometer. So with that in mind, we'll need to back these out, replace them with the proper stud. That appears to need a longer than long bolt in that location. Okay, and our timing cover is reinstalled. Now, at this point, we can also reinstall our oil fill, which is in one of my boxes of parts. This box of parts. So there's no reason I couldn't have reused the existing one. However, I came across new, genuine Cummins bits for not very much money. And so the merit of just having new plastic instead of the old was pretty appealing, because this lets me have all new gaskets, new plastic that hasn't spent 30 years getting cooked in an engine bay, and just generally looks nicer on my nice new rebuilt motor. So what we're going to do with this is just thread it in. And then work it around to point into the correct direction, which would be up. Brand new gaskets. Clearly going to take just a little bit to get them seated and pointing in the direction we need to go. I am going to try something not using the plastic as a lever. All right, we're going to give that just a little bit of thought. I don't want to mar that up if I can help it, but it definitely needs to rotate about another 90 degrees. So because we're here on the front of the motor, we're going to go ahead and install our harmonic balancer. Now for this one, I chose to put in a new harmonic balancer, and I went ahead and bought new ARP harmonic balancer bolts. And this is part 1472502 from the ARP catalog. What they suggest with these is to install torque to 90 foot-pounds using the ARP assembly lube applied to both sides of the washer as well as to the threads. So taking a minute here to lubricate my fasteners. I'm choosing to replace the harmonic balancer, not so much because the other one was bad, but again, because it had a couple of 100,000 miles on it. And this is a part that may be difficult to get out of this truck once it's installed, due to the proximity of various other pieces once the engine is in the vehicle. So replacing the balancer at this time ends up being kind of a cheap insurance to avoid problems in the future. Looks like the camera shut off while I was doing this. So installing the harmonic balancer on the front of the engine, just a real straightforward slip it on and install your 4 bolts. Put it on, treat the 4 bolts to the supplied ARP lube as well as top and bottom of the washers, and torque those to 90 foot-pounds. That buttons up the harmonic balancer on the front of the engine. Probably buttons up this engine for what I'm going to reinstall before it goes into the frame. So I keep thinking, I'm almost done putting the front of the motor together. And then I think, well, there's one more piece that I can do while I'm here. That might be more convenient to do just while I'm here. So we're going to go ahead and install the water pump. This is a relatively straightforward piece. Just a couple of bolts to hold it in place. What you don't see off camera here is I'm cleaning all of the bolts and hardware as I do this. I've got myself a little tub of brake clean, and just everything gets a dunk and then a cleanup as it comes out. So the way this works, you've got a water pump. It has an O-ring, which is kind of unique to the Cummins design, at least in my experience. And it just drops onto the block. And then 2 bolts to hold it in place. And these 2 get torqued to 18 foot-pounds, but they are 13 millimeters, not 10. And that's all there is to a water pump install. Next item on the replacement list is going to be the block heater. Now this goes down in this hole right here, closes up that freeze plug. This is the original that came back from the machine shop after they removed it, and there's probably nothing really wrong with this unit. However, part of what they sent back was the internal bracket for it with the head snapped off. So this has had a failure of some sort. Now, turns out that new units are readily available. And so again, rather than installing something that is problematic, let's go ahead and install a brand new piece. So now, what we want to do is to thread this and its accompanying piece back in here. And we want that to sit basically in that orientation with this at pretty close to 12 o'clock position. So it should be just a matter of slipping it in there like so. Lining it up where we need it. And tightening up the Allen key. And that closes up our freeze plug hole and gives us our new block heater for those cold Colorado mornings. And when we're ready, the plug just connects on and screws down. Now we're going to leave this off for the time being because this will just be mostly in our way as we're doing other things, and figure out where exactly we're going to want to route this on the vehicle anyway. Next on our to-do list is to go ahead and put the intake plenum back together. This again is not a terribly exciting operation, just a lot of gaskets and bolts, and little by little we reassemble this thing. So the first thing we've got is a gasket that covers the intake plenum itself, and that simply lines up with all of the holes, and then set the intake plate in place. Now, for my application, I'm not real particular about where the bolts end up on this one. There are some of them that are used to hold bracketry associated with the fuel injection lines, and we'll work with that when we put the injection lines back on. May need to move some of the shorter bolts and longer bolts around as a result, but otherwise it's really not that critical about where things go. However, be aware that some of the holes, like these 2 here, do come all the way through, and others, like this one, do not. Now these are going to be longer ones associated with the grid heater. Again, these on here at the end do go all the way through, and then all of them along the back side go all the way through the casting. So they're not blind holes where the length or having an overlong bolt is going to be a problem necessarily. If they are a shouldered bolt, you might have an issue. So that lays those out. We're going to put some of the bolts in place to hold everything, and then we'll go ahead and put the grid heater in. And again, the idea here is just to get things lined up and kind of hold everything in alignment. If you watch the teardown video, this is one of those pieces where I said I'm going to just put all the bolts back where they go, and that way they don't get messed up. Unfortunately, the rebuild shop had to take all of that apart, and they sent it back with the intake cover separate and a box full of bolts. So kind of playing the name that part game with the bolts. Okay, so now we need our lower gasket associated with the grid heater. I believe that is this gasket set. Pair of basically identical gaskets. Now, when you put your grid heater on, if you're putting this back into a stock truck, you're going to want to pay attention to which way this goes. In my application, it really doesn't matter which way the terminals are aligned, because we'll end up building a custom wiring harness anyway. So this can go whichever direction ends up being cleaner for the application. And then the next gasket goes on top of that, and then the intake horn. And then the trick will be to feed the bolt all the way through that and then thread it in. Once everything is in there, basically just hand tight, torque them all to 18 foot-pounds. There's a lot of gaskets in this one, so as it comes up to torque, the gaskets continue to compress. Okay, so you see that with the intake horn, that it's definitely, the gaskets are compressing. So we'll come back and check on that and again, and we're going to just work our way from the center to the out on the remaining bolts. My brand new paint is flaking off under the nuts. And with that, the intake plenum is reinstalled.
The first time I played Tempe, Arizona, it was August, and I wasn't used to the heat. It was one of those days when it was 112.